I will be sending out the link with the recording and some resources probably next week, along with the certificate of attendance for everybody. So otherwise, I'll turn it over to Dave and let him start running through some things.
Thanks, Brooke. Can everybody hear me? Well, you can't. I've got you all muted, so you can't respond back, but hopefully everybody hears me.
You're coming through, Dave.
Good to hear. Thanks, Kyle. So again, as Brooke mentioned, thanks for joining the Central Ohio Stormwater Roundtable. This is your roundtable, so we do encourage you to respond back either through the chat box, or I'll give you opportunities to, if you want to talk, let us know in the talk box. I'll unmute everybody, and if you feel like you want to chime in, please do. We're really looking for feedback on this. So first up, I just want to thank our partners. Hopefully everybody sees that first slide there. Our community partners help us bring this type of things to you. Sorry, it's a Zoom meeting and we don't have the free lunch, but hey, now you can just go to your refrigerator and grab a snack when you want to. So you are getting a free lunch. So thanks again for joining us. Today, what we've thought about doing is stream setbacks and talking about that. And there's been a couple of things that have kind of pushed this to the forefront maybe, and time to talk about stream setbacks again. We have done stream setbacks for years. What I've basically done is gone through our information and tried to pull together a cohesive presentation on setbacks. So this is going to be a fairly comprehensive look at setbacks and different avenues and different parts of that, but we're going to keep it down to a minimum as how far we delve into it. So I hope this gives everybody a comprehensive look at stream setbacks, some of the issues with them, some of the, how do we solve some of these problems? What are the problems? And try to come up with solutions for you. We'll have all of this information available after the roundtable. We'll put together a package of resources that I reference at least in a lot of this. And hopefully this will be helpful to you. So again, we're looking for that feedback. Be sure you go into the chat box. Brooke will be monitoring the chat box. I can't see it right at the time being. So if you have a question, put that in the chat box and she'll try to relay that to me. And hopefully we can answer that and talk about it right at that moment. So feel free to be reactive on anything that I say or comment on. So let's get started. Let's get to what I want to kind of do is look at some current events, basically. What's kind of prompted this talk of stream setbacks. And this is our latest weather data from NOAA. If you look at Columbus rainfall, this is the last 30 days, basically. I downloaded this the other day. But what we see in the graph here, this is May 18th and 19th. This storm event was records for the 2 days. So we had a record rainfall event in those 2 days, that 2-day period. Let's look back at the top 10 lists. Here we have the top 10 wettest Marches. So this period of record, you're looking at from 1878 to 2020. Top 10 wettest March. Number 2 is right there in 2020. So our last March was the second wettest period on record. You got to go back to 1964 to have number 1. So we've got a lot of calls. People say, I've lived here for 40 years and I've never seen it like this. And frankly, I tell them, well, you're right. You have never seen it like this. And this is just something that I want to point out to people, that we are having some extremely severe weather. You look through this list, I find it curious that number 6 here is 2008. Number 9 is 2007. So out of the period of record, 140, 150 years, 3 of those top 10, 30%, are in the last 12 years or so. So you're looking at, since the millennial change, we've had quite a lot of record-breaking weather. Something to think about. There again, you can see our top 10, 20. So then here's our annual data. You can see down here, we're looking at June. Here's the 2 events. You see these 2 steps in the precipitation right here. Here's your March event. Here's your May event. And we're already at 25.6 inches of rainfall compared to what your average normal is very low, much lower. And if you look at the top here, our average rainfall, most of it occurs here. Here's the peak. We haven't even gotten to the peak yet. So we are well on our way to perhaps another record-breaking year of rainfall. That'll be we'll have to wait and see what happens as far as the rest of the year. But like I say, we haven't even reached the bulk of our rainfall yet coming up. So the other thing I want to take a look at then is just kind of what that does. How does that affect our streams? This was a presentation you can see from our expo. Dr. Bob Hawley presented. And again, like I say, we'll have this resource. You can look at the whole thing. I'm not going to go through the whole presentations. He's got about 150 slides on here. So we'll just kind of hit through some of the highlights, at least that I thought that I want to present. And some of that is looking at, what is the urban stream syndrome? What's causing that? And those drivers you can see, direct effects, channelization, indirect effects, pollution and stormwater, but how those all combine within the streams to get that biological response, which is often what we do to look at these streams. We do sampling in the streams, we look at the bugs, we look at the water quality, and we say, hey, there's a problem with this stream. What is that? But you've got all of these altered features that are happening because of that flow regime. Go to the next one here. The stream functional pyramid, as you can see, that everything kind of builds to that biological. So if you're going to affect change, it's going to come down here at the bottom. You've got to get that base problem fixed before you can do that. And a lot of that comes to stormwater management. That affects your hydrologic conditions, the hydraulic conditions. It affects your geomorphology. It goes to the physiochemical features of the stream and ends up, affecting your biology. So if we're looking at stream restoration in urban catchments, you've got to look at that catchment to save the stream. We're talking about that green infrastructure idea, that broad-based changes in the catchment is how we're going to improve our water quality in streams. Bob did a good job on kind of updating us on how we've developed our stormwater. So this is the last kind of slide in that presentation on where we're at with stormwater, extended detention basins with sediment forebays. And we're looking at basically, conventional peak matching detention is how our conventional current stormwater approach is. Now, so what does that mean to streams? Well, because of that conventional detention, we're looking at more erosion. This is caused because we're looking at that. If you've worked with Bob or have looked at some of his studies, it's that Q critical flow regime that they're looking at. As you increase that flow, your material is transported further and larger material is transported. You end up losing bed material. It doesn't get replaced. And eventually end up with scour. So let's look at geomorphology a little bit too. You know, it's not just the flow that's in that channel, it's that shape as well. So when we have confined valleys, like you see on the left there, as opposed to an unconfined, well-connected floodplain, you know, his example here is showing, you know, a 4-foot depth as opposed to 2-foot depth over here on this low flow channel because of that connection to the floodplain. You know, we see this is common in urban situations as well. And something I want to point out here is scale. Even though that's 4 feet, this works at any scale. So even when you're looking at an urban drainage, perhaps you know, if we have a developed site on this side of the bank, you know, you have a home over here, and this is an undeveloped property over here. Well, as soon as you come in here and develop this property and bring your fill in, you've basically created this V-type channel. And what that does is that increases that depth of flow, that increases that velocity, and you're starting to transport material. So you end up with scour and rilling and erosion. Or you even push it off onto the properties. I can't tell you how many times we've had property owners say that subdivision that went in next to me is dumping water on my property. And trying to explain this to them and saying, well, actually they're not. It's not, only the slope is coming to that property, and it's no more than it was before. That flow is still the same. It's still the same volume that's coming through there. It's just been confined in that channel and is creating those problems. You know, they could be even, I've seen situations where a subdivision comes in and that flow is taken off site, so they're not even contributing the same amount to that area, yet you're still getting that confined flow and that erosion problems. So any scale on this is important, and that's what we need to look at. And the reason I talk about that scale, so the other reason that this has kind of come up as well has to do with the permits that have come up recently. If you're not aware, the Ohio General Permit for filling Category 1 and 2 isolated wetlands and ephemeral streams, this is a draft permit that is out. Comment period ended yesterday for it. This has come about because of the new WOTUS rule for the federal government. The changes in the WOTUS definitions have exposed a lot of these ephemeral channels to non-regulatory aspects. So OEPA has rapidly put together this draft permit. It's a general permit to cover impacts to ephemeral streams. That's kind of the impetus behind talking about stream setbacks again and what that might mean to communities. So if you're going to have coverage under this permit, this coverage under this permit is limited to filling and discharge dredge material into ephemeral streams determined not to be waters of the United States and not subject to 404 or 401 clean. That occurs that would not be covered by the Corps, the Army Corps of Engineers. So this still takes determination of whether or not that's Army Corps of Engineer jurisdiction or not. But if we think about USGS topo maps, and generally what's on those is the blue line streams. You've got most of those will always be Corps jurisdiction. But that leaves a lot of ephemeral streams that aren't covered by this. That's hopefully where the EPA, Ohio EPA, is going to cover with this general permit. Now, something under the general permit also is that notification requirements outlined in this section are required for any amount of fill or discharge into isolated wetlands and the fill and discharge into ephemeral streams exceeding 300 linear feet. So the only time notification is needed for the filling of these drainage areas is if you're over 300 feet. Less than that, you're not going to hear anything about that. It's going to be kind of a by right ability to develop those properties and those drainage areas. So this could be problematic, but it
Hey,
may
Dave.
also,
Dave,
yeah,
if I can pop in there for a second, we got a question that did come through from Paul Kennedy.
great,
And let me just read it to you. That'd be
sure,
easier. Okay.
yeah.
So he's just asking, curious about which streams in Central Ohio have recently been assessed for quality. How old are the existing assessments? Are there new assessments coming? This would help inform us where the current challenges are, and then we can focus on the triggers to lower quality. So I guess.
Yeah, so EPA has been slow to resample a lot of these areas. And in fact, they've kind of gone back and looked at their schedule and realized that they haven't been able to meet the schedule, especially for the TMDLs. So they've kind of reevaluated their assessment schedule and their testing. It doesn't appear to be happening very quickly. They're looking at other avenues like citizen support on testing. We've even looked at how can we kind of crowdsource this information and get a better idea of what is impaired. But yeah, that's a good question. I don't have a good answer for it. It is something that's lacking. A lot of the data out there is old, and that's something we found around here. There's been actually a lot of improvement in some of the streams that have been previously designated as impaired or otherwise. And there has been that improvement. So again, I don't have a good solution for that.
Dave, I can piggyback a little bit on your comment.
Sounds good. Go ahead.
The Darby has seen some pretty extensive sampling and reports over the last few years. Obviously, that's one in Franklin County that's of very high quality. They've gotten into some tributaries of Blacklick and done some sampling. But in general, most of the EPA big data sets are still from 10 years ago, 8 years ago, or beyond. They're looking to update on a larger scale, but a lot of times what we're seeing in Franklin County in particular is project-based sampling and data collection. So when we're going in and doing a 319 grant or a WRSP project or anything like that, the sampling is required ahead of time and obviously post, but they're not those big picture assessments really need. And so we're working with some others to try to figure out ways to get better handles through volunteers and grants and things like that to do some much more broad-based, but there won't be that entire systematic approach from the EPA anytime soon. They'll have some new subset streams sampled, but it will cover all of Franklin County.
Thanks, Kyle. So the next avenue I want to look at is just some local regulations, some regulations in Franklin County. As you can see, here's our Franklin County zoning resolution. There are riparian setbacks in place for the Big Darby, Alum Creek, and Big Walnut watersheds. And that basically applies to, here's an example. This is what Big Darby setbacks look like on our GIS database. It uses the calculation that looks at the meander width or the floodplain, the greater of which, depending on which is greater. And then the smaller tribs are, basically 100-foot setback on them. We've had some issues. A lot of these fields, especially in these agricultural areas around here, are used for biosolid disposal. And they've been treated with the typical setback in the agriculture community is 33 feet. Well, we're tasked with looking at setbacks of 100 feet on these things. And all of those biosolid applications, they're under an NPDES permit which is something that we try to enforce locally, but they weren't observing that. They were observing the agricultural setbacks and not the big Darby ones. So hopefully this has been changed in the review of those biosolid setbacks, but it's something that we're aware of here that's been problematic. Here's Allen Creek, Big Walnut Creek setback, just a map of those areas. Now keep in mind our Franklin County zoning resolution only applies to those areas that are under the zoning resolution. A lot of our townships have their own zoning, and they need to have similar regulations in place if they're going to protect these areas. And it's up to them to review projects and look at those setbacks to make sure they're meeting those requirements. Again, it's applicable to the perennial and ephemeral intermittent streams with a defined bed, bank, and channel. Columbus has their stream corridor protection zone based on that same 147 times drainage area calculation, either that or it's got a minimum and maximum 50 feet to a maximum of 250 feet. And something I want to point out in all of this is there are usually regulations in place, but they're variable across the board. I've seen even some of our townships have different standards applied to the stream setback if they've got. So you really got to look at that local area to see what exactly is it. It is not straightforward. It's very confusing, and that's one of the problems with stream setbacks. You can see a little bit clearer. Again, like I say, 50 feet. And something, again, that number 3, 50 feet from top of bank of fourth order streams are larger. I hope everybody knows what a fourth order stream is. I hope everybody can find a fourth order stream designation. It's very hard to find. And if you don't know what we're talking about, it's basically the main stems of the Scioto and Allen Creek and Big Walnut. Beyond that, those are not fourth order streams. So really we're talking about the main stems of our larger streams around here. So again, I want to just take a look at some of the literature that's out there. Again, these we'll have these links in our resource package that we'll send out to you after this, along with, I believe we're doing our usual certificate of participation on this. So you will get that as well, along with the links, a lot of these. Taking a look, we've looked back through what exactly is the required buffer, and you know, it really depends on what your goal is. If you're looking at maintaining salamanders, you know, terrestrial organisms, you might have to increase that buffer width. A lot of our salamanders, particularly in the isolated wetlands, you know, require a significant buffer to maintain that population within those wetlands. So if you've got that situation in a stream, you know, hopefully your buffer is including those wetland areas and providing a buffer to those wetlands for those considerations. You know, I think when we look at this, you know, to provide optimal habitat, native forest vegetation should be maintained or restored in all buffers. So I think that's at least, at the very least, we should be looking at forested riparian corridors. That's the main take home from this. Now, depending on what your goal is in you know, whether that's you know, recreation, trails, or preserving some kind of wildlife, you need to apply buffers that are going to be sufficient for that. I think that's where you know, when we look at communities, you know, I've got municipal folks out there, we've got consultants, you know, we've got people that are just homeowners and interested in this. And all of this can be applied at scale, you know, whether it's your property, whether it's your project, or whether it's your municipality. We all need to think about this scaling and providing these buffers if we have streams on our properties. Again, here's some more resources that we have: vegetative riparian buffers and buffer ordinances. If you're interested in that, you can take a look at some of this information. Some of the other things we have: streamside values, you know, the economic development. I think one thing we want to portray is, now this isn't property takings. We're really looking at something that can be looked at as amenity. I'm always surprised at people buying property either waterfront or on a stream, and they end up filling the bank with riprap or complaining about the wildlife that's in the wetland on their backyard, or even the flooding problems. You know, this needs to be thought of as amenities. These are our green infrastructure. You know, they're providing valuable habitat. They're providing a lot of stormwater value. You know, it's protecting properties if we have these setbacks in place and established. And I think it limits exposure to communities, you know, as far as liability on how they manage those areas. So it's something to think about in your community. You know, how much are we spending on these things? What kind of things are we doing to help our community? And how much is this costing? Again, here's another wetland stream buffers, review the science, regulatory approach. We'll have all of these links or documents available to you at the, and send those links out to you later. But yeah, you know, I would encourage you to read about this, come up with your own, meet some requirements, but do take a look at stream setbacks. I think, you know, the time has come to really have some value applied to the environmental services that these are, and it really will help with water quality. So like I said, this is just some pictures of projects that we've looked at, some issues, and, you know, public funds and grants that are being expended to basically provide a setback, provide protection for private properties. Whereas, you know, if we had planned ahead, this is really a planning tool. These setbacks are something that really are looking forward at development and looking at a progression that's going to preserve and protect properties. And that's how these need to be looked at. A lot of these, you know, when we go back and try to retrofit, it's a tough thing to do. It is very tough, especially when we're talking streams. You know, how do you mitigate for a stream impact? A lot of this, you know, in the draft permit, the areas that do require mitigation, it's gonna go to a bank. You're gonna lose that stream function in your local area for buying credits in a bank somewhere. And it probably, most likely, won't be in the HUC that you're in. Another example, you know, these homeowners have been struggling with this stream and in their location. Yet, you know, that's how it was built, meant to be. Fortunately, they have a reserve area that is able to overbank, and frequently looks like this. But, you know, you get complaints from neighbors, hey, our backyard's flooding. What do you do with that? Well, again, you know, this can be looked at as an amenity, not necessarily a flooding issue. Road protection. You can see the, you know, the bank protection that's been in, ripraps have been in place for protecting that bank. Here's a stormwater pond. You know, this was placed in the floodplain. Creek flooded and overbanked and broke through and actually captured this stormwater and captured the channel. This has since been repaired, but there was an outfall through here that channel redeveloped and reconnected, and the storm pond actually captured that channel. More public funds spent, protection of a homeowner. And this is pretty common in most of our municipalities that have these older areas that are on streams. You know, we love our streams to death. Everybody wants their back deck and porch overlooking the babbling brook. You know, and that's problematic. Here's some more. You know, one thing I forgot to do, Brooke, is we were going to play that video. It just dawned on me.
I think Kyle might be planning to do that, so I didn't want to. I don't know the timing wise. Kyle, did you want to wait and play that video when you're going, or we can do it? We can try doing it now if you want.
Let's start with that because I think I'm approaching about the end of my slides, and we'll switch over to Kyle and we can start that video at that point. How about that?
So just wait for Kyle. Okay.
Any questions in the chat or anything so far?
No, the chat's been pretty quiet so far, actually.
Okay, like I said, this is your roundtable, so you make it what you can. If you have any questions, you know, feel free. I will open it up at the end of my slides if you want to have an open conversation. Everybody can chime in if they like, and
you know,
we'll have a little talk there, and that'll give us a little moment to kind of regroup and get Kyle ready to follow up on this.
Yeah, Dave, I will say maybe before we move on there, just those last few slides I thought were really telling, you know, of just the situations that we see every day that we kind of, you know, deal with daily. But that last one of those last ones there was showing where those public funds were used to protect one homeowner, and then now a homeowner downstream was starting to have, you know, erosion as well and wanting public funds used to assist them. So I mean, just that spiral effect of where this kind of goes to is.
Yeah, and that's something that we kind of see is, you know, one homeowner rip-raps a bank and it just transfers that energy downstream and we end up with another problem. You know, some of these situations, there's larger areas across the stream that don't really affect anybody. You see in this example, and a lot of these are on private property. This lot here, you can see their property lines extend off the picture basically, and that entire stream is basically on private property. You know, what they can do with that, if you go by the new general draft permit, you know, they've got 300 feet there that they can basically work on at will with no recourse, basically. We need to look at ways of helping them help with the stream problems. So that again is an ongoing issue that we deal with, you know, how to appropriately address this in a way that's gonna function for both the homeowner and the environment. And in a lot of these situations, there's nothing to do. With the property being threatened, it's going to take hard armoring to fix this. There's not always a good solution. Kind of a good example here. You can see that on this property. This one, you know, their deck is right on the edge. If something's not done here, they're going to be having problems. And if you notice on this, you know, this doesn't look like top-down erosion. This is the other thing of looking at what is the problem. This was mass wasting at the toe of the slope, and that area has slumped down into the creek. So this is a good example of what we're seeing with urban stream syndrome, is that mass wasting at the toe of the slope and the failure of the bank sliding down into the stream. Another example here, you can see that mass wasting. Large trees, those are, 80, 100-year-old oaks that are now tumbling down the slope because of that mass wasting. Old infrastructure, see the piles that are gone and eroded away. This is what we're seeing on a day-to-day basis. Here you can see remnants. Here's a fence. This is slid down the hill. Again, here's this large mature tree that's been hanging on for the time being. Mass wasting at the toe of the slope, and that sloughing of the slope. Looking for setbacks, we're still allowing construction to be occurring very close to steep slopes. This might have a setback from the center line of the creek, but it's not including that steep slope area as well. Another example, and you notice, these are not young trees. These are not areas that have been eroding over time. It's happening in a fairly quick time frame, and that again is that readjustment of the creek, looking for that new channel width because of the increased flows and that movement of the sediments. Most of our creeks are sediment starved. If you look at them, you'll see hard pan, a lot of clay bottom creeks, and they're looking for sediment. So that gets scoured off the banks and carried downstream very quickly. Hard armoring, sometimes this is what it's going to take. And, I offer up to you, I don't know what value that is to a homeowner. I guess they can still see the channel. I'd hate to have to walk down that bank to explore my creek or to enjoy my waterfront. Maintenance-wise, you get all sorts of things growing up in between the rocks. It's tough to maintain. You end up, woody vegetation coming in there that gets cut down because of views, or it's noxious usually, or invasive plants. But again, what do you do if you don't have that setback in place that's appropriate for that channel? So something from a legal standpoint, at least, is looking at these. I know a lot of municipalities have not had the political will to implement setbacks because of that taking, or that having to pay a landowner. But if we look at some of the revised code language, changing flow water by volume, direction, velocity in a manner that causes damages to upstream or downstream neighbors may result in legal liabilities for those damages. So a lot of times we point to Ohio water law and say, well, this is a case by case basis, and neighbor against neighbor, a civil case. How can we avoid that and do what's right in the first place? And I think looking at setbacks is the way of doing that, and having strong setbacks for the future can avoid a lot of these problems. And again, this is part of our green infrastructure. This was something EPA came to one of our expos and did a green infrastructure and codes and ordinances. This presentation, again, will be part of our resources that you can take a look at. Just trying to highlight some of this. Looking at that green infrastructure, it's at scale again. Here we're looking at, the site scale. What can you do from a site standpoint? looking at that neighborhood scale. What can you do at that larger kind of, mixed use development or new parking areas? And then from a municipal standpoint, how can we affect that change? So green infrastructure is broad brushed. It needs to be applied broadly across the catchment again. And that's what we really want to look at, is how can we affect that change? And setbacks is a part of that. That can affect both your site locally, to larger scale development, and having that municipal aspect of there, not only protects your residents from future problems, but your municipality as well. And again, it provides that amenity, and we really want to see that as an amenity. Some of the tenets kind of what's the hierarchy? I want to just point out preserve. Preserve has always been like the top one of that hierarchy. And that's what setbacks are doing, is preserve it in the first place. Let's look at that environmental service and let's try to preserve that. Recycle, reduce, reuse. Those are the kind of tenets of what we're looking for. And again, setbacks really fit into that preserve, that first tenet there. Just to highlight that little circle. So when we're looking at, small urban channels, you can see this on a site-by-site basis. Here's a stable, wide bank, area to overflow. You look right downstream there. You can see where the instability occurs, that narrow valley starts occurring. You start getting that increased velocity in the channel. You get that increased movement of sediments. This location, you see the deposition that's occurring here. And if you can see down here, you start seeing the cobbles. So this scale-wise works, from a very small scale to very large scales. Something that we've looked at is how do you affect some changes in urban areas? So, here's a small drainage ditch in the backyards of a very urban setting. But then you've got these open space areas, it's currently mowed, maintained. This is how it is. What if you were to take and change this contour a little bit and put in an excavation? I did some quick calculations here. 4-to-1 slope, 2 feet deep. You do a 10 by 10 square. 181 of these equals an acre-foot of storage. On this catchment right here, we have problems with drainage, and they've looked at the overall catchment, and they need about 2 acres of acre-feet of storage to affect some significant change in this. And in a broad brush manner, if we could find 181 areas like this within this stretch, we could actually get an acre-foot of storage by recreating something like this. This can take several different forms. What kind of things can we do? Maintain turf. It could look just like it is, except just a little different shape. It would flood during flood times, but then go back to a maintained turf situation. Tree wells, something that could be easily implemented, and maybe a municipal program where they just excavate areas out, plant a tree in it, and you've got this riparian corridor, treed corridor that's beginning to happen throughout the catchment. I did a little calculation on something, a tree well like this. We promote rain barrels as kind of that gateway to stormwater. This area here would equal 27 rain barrels throughout the catchment. So not only if you have a rain barrel program to get people aware of stormwater, but then tree wells, again, you could get 27 rain barrel equivalents in something of that nature. Floodplain restoration. Find areas like this and look at, recreating a floodplain area. Could be easily done. Soft and hard landscaping, just like you see there with the wing wall. This could be continued. Of course, that's going to be an expense, but again, it could be a retrofit to a stormwater solution within municipalities and along creeks. Here's just an example of somebody's backyard, you know, and what we see typically is the filling of these areas. You know, it's adding the riprap in there because, well, I don't like I get water on my lawn, you know, so they bring in riprap, they bring in fill, and they confine that channel within that confined valley again. And you see the erosion that's occurring along that bankful flow. That's because that flow is getting confined and speeded up and moving sediment downstream. So if we look at that cross section of that contour, it's something that looks like that blue line you see there. You know, here you can see what basically we're existing is at. You know, that neck point right there is about where your bankful is at. What if we were to just take this and modify this a little bit? So now we maintain this current slope. We take that nick point out and move it back upslope a little bit. You get this kind of contour. Just increase that overbank area significantly along that entire property, and you've reduced the speed and volume that is moving at. Not the volume so much, you've just displaced it in a flatter zone, but you've created less energy for that current through that area. You know, and this could be, you know, a backyard amenity to the creek. You know, you've now come back in, put some trees in there, contour that nicely. You know, instead of now worrying about your kids falling off the bank into the creek, they can actually go down there and approach the creek, you know, in a much more gentle slope. You're not going to be down there during flood events anyway. It's not, these are very flashy creeks. You know, they will respond to flood flows within hours, you know, within 12 hours. A lot of times these will draw back down. They're not extended areas that are going to flood and kill grass or that. You can still get back in there and mow it, but these can be amenities to your properties. And this is something I think we need to approach. In a way we can approach that is with those setbacks. What can I do with my setback on my property? You know, I can't build in it. I'm paying taxes on it. How can I affect a change that's actually good for water quality and for my property? And with that, I think I'm going to swap it over to Kyle, talk a little bit about setbacks and easements, and perhaps talk about, you know, what can we do from a tax abatement standpoint or something. You know, how can we make these amenities actually helpful to landowners that are a lot of times paying taxes on large parts of property that could be benefiting both stormwater, the environment, and the pocketbook of the residents. So Kyle, are you ready to go? And do you want to, let's play that. So let me set that up first. I meant to play this back when I was talking about steam, our weather. We've got a video from our Hell Branch Meadows project. It's a stream restoration project. This was during that May 18th and 19th event, or just after it. I think this was on the 20th.
The day after, yep.
Go ahead, Kyle. I'm gonna be quiet for a while and let you take over.
Brooke, do you have that to share or?
Yeah, hang on one second. Dave, if you can stop. Share. Yeah, if you can stop sharing yours.
Yep.
And then let me pull this up. Hopefully this will. Hang on one second. Share. Okay, is that showing up?
Looks good.
Looks good. Okay.
Yep.
Let me go ahead and.
I'm seeing it, but no video or no audio on it.
No audio?
Yeah, I'm not getting any audio.
Let me try. Hang on one second.
Hi everyone, Kyle Wilson, Conservation Program Manager with Franklin Soil and Water. Last night we received a pretty substantial rain event. Some places in Franklin County received over 3 inches of rain from what we're hearing. And so I wanted to come out to one of our restoration sites, Hill Branch Meadows, and take a look at some of the impacts that rain event is having. So as we're looking here, you can see Hill Branch Run coming in from the north of our property, and it enters Hill Branch Meadows, where we have a multi-million-dollar stream and wetland restoration project funded by the Ohio EPA. And you can see, as you look north, Hill Branch was formerly ditched and straightened, was an over-widened and over-deepened channel. And so even now, most of its floodwater is contained within that channel and not able to access the floodplain. Then as you come into our property, you can kind of see immediately with the reconnection to the floodplain during the restoration that we have floodplain access and a great deal of it. The stream flows just on the other side of the tower there, and you can see moving water out in that area. But here closer to me, you can see, water that's much more stagnant, flowing through here, but able to keep that velocity down up on these floodplain benches and way up in here into the new floodplain for Hill Branch Meadows. So we're getting all this storage, we're reducing flows downstream, we're filtering out those pollutants, and you're getting a much more naturalized floodplain setting here that in the past we weren't able to see taking place here. So this is an important example of restoring areas. We know that agricultural drainage in urban and suburban settings is very important, but that agricultural production and development doesn't have to be mutually exclusive from environmental benefits. And we can kind of do both with projects like these and two-stage ditches and all the other techniques available to us to kind of improve our environment while we live and move and grow crops and do other things in it as well.
Brooke. And I will try to share my screen here with you now. Brooke, you'll have to give me permission again, it looks like, as you disabled participant screen sharing.
Hang on, let me find out how to do that.
Hey, we're all still relatively new to this Zoom thing. You have probably. We've been doing a Zoom for a couple months now, but we're still learning, so bear with us.
So I know I muted everyone. Do I have to do something? Or is that on your end, Brooke?
Actually, let me reach out to Kylie real quick. She's the host and we're co-hosts, so let me just make.
While Brooke does that, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Kyle Wilson. I'm the Conservation Program Manager for Franklin Soil and Water. And my primary responsibilities are to administer our conservation easement program and kind of provide oversight to any on-the-ground restoration projects that we may have. So everything from, you know, our backyards programs to our large-scale restorations and things like that. So I work a lot with our conservation staff, Kurt Kellio, Ryan Paluski, Dave, Brooke, to get projects on the ground in a variety of ways. So if you haven't met me before, hopefully we can talk about to get things on the ground in your community sometime soon.
Okay. Yeah, perfect. Okay. I think Kylie made you a
Coming up
note,
there?
so we should be
Okay.
good.
Great. So I think the photo's up right now of Hell Branch and the tower. Is that correct, Dave?
Yes.
So this gives you an idea of what we were looking at in that video. This is roughly the same spot that I was standing during that flood event. And you can see, you know, we're high and dry here. I was standing at about a foot of water, maybe a foot and a half of water during that flood event. Very slow velocities, obviously, up there. But beyond that tower is where the actual Hell Branch Run is located. So that's the mainstream channel. And the volume of water that was just stored in that during that event was quite impressive. So I just wanted to show you that before the restoration, and we'll talk more about restoration later in my presentation, before the restoration, all that water was just passed downstream. It wasn't able to get the ecological services that are offered there on a floodplain, and it was just pushed downstream, someone else's problem. And that's what, you know, through riparian setbacks and obviously other stormwater BMPs, you know, we can start to affect what we're pushing downstream and making someone else's problem. So as I mentioned, I administer our conservation easement program. Franklin Soil and Water has held conservation easements for a couple decades now, really. We were some of the first to be doing that in Central Ohio. We hold about 35 conservation easements throughout the county. They range in size from very small, an acre or two, to, you know, larger than 100+ acres. They're all throughout the county, but they're focused on riparian corridors and stream protection has been the focus of our program. So what I wanted to do, you know, in regards to speaking about setbacks and their importance and getting you thinking about, you know, protecting around our streams, I wanted to take some time to talk about additional protections. You know, riparian setbacks are great. They're zoning, they're enforceable. You know, they've got ways teeth, but there's other avenues that you can go that can provide that additional layer of protection. You know, conservation easements and acquisition, you know, they're more permanent. They don't change over time. They're recorded and locked in, and they also afford you some opportunities for restoration and kind of making, like Dave said, making that an amenity for your community. And throughout the presentation, I'll also touch on the funding opportunities that come along with easements and restoration and some opportunities and ways that you can kind of tie things together. So first we'll talk about our valuable natural resources in Franklin County. Sometimes Ohio and Central Ohio and Franklin County get a bad rap, but we've got some really valuable resources. We've always got to keep that in mind in our decision-making processes and valuing those to the extent that you know, really starts to make us embrace those more as a community. You know, our streams and rivers, from the Big Darby Creek National State and National Scenic River to Big Walnut to Walnut Creek, Blacklick. These are all fine systems, and to have the abundance of these systems right here in Central Ohio, we're, you know, in Scioto, these big massive systems come together in our town, and Three Creeks Metro Park and all these systems that we really need to take care of and you know, build that community pride in. Our floodplains, we saw the importance of them in that video, where all the work is done to help combat some of our negative effects from a developing population. and those riparian zones, those transitional areas between the water and land ecosystems. A lot of times, you know, they are valuable for protection, but it's also where our recreation and interaction with our streams and floodplains takes place. Our bike paths go down there. You know, when we go down there to fish, we're accessing the riparian zones. They need to be valued in a way that shows importance. And then, of course, wetlands and wetland soils. Franklin County, you know, most of it, unless you're on a bluff or an area near a stream, most of it has hydric soils, wet soils that want to hold water, that want to be wet throughout the year and want to grow wetland species and things. Over the years, we've drained those soils and modified those soils and things like that. But we have a very high quantity of those soils that are there for restoration and conservation. Large woodlots. It's probably one of our most depleted resources. We don't have a lot of them left, so buying those and kind of protecting those is pretty important. So one of the tools to do that are conservation easements. Again, Franklin Soil and Water holds these easements and can help and assist you with establishing easements in your communities or working on a specific easement as part of a development or anything else that you need for protection. But essentially, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, it's a deed restriction placed on a piece of property that runs for that parcel forever. So that's the good thing, is it can be one landowner that it's agreed upon on, and if that person sells, you know, and that property turns over 20 times, the easement runs with that, and that protection runs with that. The types of land, again, you know, we focus on the streams and lake shores. You can also protect land for habitat and wildlife and just scenic and cultural resources as well. So these easements can be used for protection in several ways. There's certain activities that are not allowed in a conservation easement. The good thing about easements is they are all, you know, can be written individually for the needs of the property and to accommodate, you know, the landowner and what's taking place there. They can be, you know, on a case-by-case basis and can vary from one site to another. But they do essentially, you know, in essence, they want to prohibit activities from taking place on that land in perpetuity. Those activities include drilling and mining, building and construction is the big one, timber harvest at times, mowing and spraying, and power line utilities and things like that. So these are good tools in conservation to really add that extra layer of protection to things. They're also, you know, a way to allow things to happen in there. You're still allowed to access conservation easements. You know, it's not a nature preserve where everything is just hands off. You're allowed to recreate there. You're allowed to do things as long as it isn't expressed prohibited easement language. Landowners can retain the rights to the private property. A conservation easement isn't automatically a park, you know, so sometimes in areas where you're looking for protection and you're approaching people and saying, hey, you know, we've got a stream restoration project and we really need access to your property, and to do that restoration, we've got to have, you know, some protection long term. You know, people throw up a red flag if they think that that's going to become a park and people are going to do it. But with conservation easements, you're able to maintain that private property and still get a right. Again, private land, not necessarily public land. Easements can be on public land, and we do hold some on those for municipalities that want to protect certain lands, but it's not a requirement. And again, you're allowed to do anything consistent with deed restrictions. One example we always use is a lot of people like to maintain the right to get fire of their conservation easement areas, and we're able to accommodate that in the deed language simply by saying if it's dead or downed wood, they can use it for firewood and things like that. So why grant conservation easements? Protect property and natural resources from impending development is the big one. You know, it's got to be a driving factor. But there's also others, you know, financial gain is selling. A property owner can sell a conservation easement to a community or to an agency like Soil and Water or a land trust or anything like that. And essentially they can make, you know, half the property value or more of the property, you know, that's put into the conservation easement. So it's a way to, you know, get some value out of your property while you're there and enjoying it and things like that without giving rights and full benefits to that property. Ways to access some of that grant funding is if you're selling or through the Clean Ohio Open Space Conservation Fund. The Wetland Reserve Program also has payments through CS that can establish conservation easements. So oftentimes there are ways to get some revenue sources. There's also tax benefits. A lot of folks that are able to grant a conservation easement do so for the income tax reductions that they can, or income tax benefits that they can often get. An easement donation is sort of valued just like any charitable gift. So you're able to deduct that worth over a 10-year period. So oftentimes there's some pretty beneficial tax benefits to donation easement and property tax reduction. Franklin County property tax is an issue, and for some of the folks that own larger lots and have riparian corridors or things like that, you know, those taxes are substantial, and by granting an easement, you can oftentimes reduce those down to a valuation that's similar to wasteland and things like that. So obviously, if you're granting an easement all on floodplain or undevelopable area, your tax reductions aren't going to be. But if you know, granted a significant part that was developable and remove those rights and those values from that, you could see some pretty significant tax reduction on a given property. And then, you know, obviously, in the context of what we're doing here today in the roundtable discussion, easements are often established as a post-construction BMP. So, you know, you need to show ways that you're going to protect things long-term, and this is a great way. So early in the development plans, if you know you're able to have those discussions about certain areas of the property and reserves and things like that, you know, conservation easements could be used as that tool to provide that long-term protection. And what they bring value in is if you're with someone like Soil and Water or many of the land trusts, it creates a mechanism for inspection. So we go out each year and inspect our conservation easements for compliance. So therefore, you're getting eyes on that system on a yearly basis and knowing that you're meeting that post-construction requirement there. Other forms of protection, obviously, you know, conservation easements aren't the only way to go about protecting these setback areas and riparian corridors. Additionally, there's agricultural easements. We don't have a lot of family-owned and operated farming going on anymore in Franklin County. There is a surprisingly more than we think, even though we've reduced it quite a bit. But agricultural easements are a way to maintain those farming operations sort of in perpetuity, while taking away, again, that development kind of taxation and things like that. So you're allowed to continue the easement or the agricultural practices, but no other development and things like that. Environmental covenants, they're another good way to protect property in addition to just a setback ordinance. These come into play a lot of times where a restoration is done either through 319 funding or others. The EPA or another entity will require that environmental covenant is placed on the property. They're very similar to conservation easements, but they don't, you know, necessarily have quite as much in terms of inspections and enforcement and things like that. Oftentimes they're done by 3 parties. So you bring in an extra party like a soil and water or other to kind of help you with the enforcement on those. And then obviously fee simple acquisition. We'll talk and see here a little later in the presentation some examples of, you know, really looking at setback areas and riparian corridors and things like that as an amenity, as David touched on earlier. And, you know, fee simple acquisition for communities is one way that, you know, you can get that open space and get that protection, but also have that to build amenities and really, you know, build something special for your community. So with that, we'll kind of transition to restoration and talk about some of the things that take place within the setback areas as they are come online and want to be part of your bigger picture community. Restoration is just the action of returning something to its former condition. Obviously, we're not looking for pre-settlement condition. It's unrealistic. We want to get as close to some of those elements as we can. When we restore prairie, we want to use, you know, prairie seed banks that were here previously to settlement. When we restore our streams and wetlands, we want them to be as close as possible to pre-settlement conditions, but we're also realistic that, you know, we're never going back to that exact condition. So why is the restoration needed? Wetlands were drained for agricultural usage. Pretty much all of Franklin County saw systematic draining of our soils and wetlands at one point. The streams were modified for that drainage, straightened and ditched. They became over widened and over deep. They became systems to move water away from the site, and really, you know, no other farm was there. The habitat for the bugs and fish and the ability to uptake nutrients and things like that kind of went away with the straightening and ditching. Woodlands were obviously cleared for agricultural and development. Impervious surfaces and lack of stormwater controls led to degraded streams. Dave showed some slides about the urban stream syndromes there. And so we are left within our setbacks and our riparian zones and several other areas in our landscape, the need for these restorations. So stream restoration is one that Central Ohio has seen a really large amount take place here in Central Ohio because of some factors that we're pretty lucky to have. We had one of the kind of premier pioneers in stream restoration from the consulting and execution side, and Oxbow Stream Restoration that was doing projects here in Central Ohio. We had the right here funding these projects at a heavy pace. We had OSU who was you know, working on open wide ditches, and Dr. Andy Ward was developing practices and things, and we were getting examples on the ground. And we had ODNR also pioneering some stream restoration techniques. So we've been very fortunate to see a lot of this, and the good thing for you guys looking at your communities and thinking, you know, how do we get stream restoration funds on the ground, is that the funding sources, EPA 319, EPA's WRRSP program, they are familiar with the work that has already been done in Central Ohio, and they want to piggyback and build on that. So, you know, the work that they've done already is just going to be compounded, and we're going to see those improvement in water quality. So if you're looking to do large scale restoration work, you know, talking to us, talking to others that have already done the projects, and we can assist you in a lot of that planning and of the processes and get you on board with what all it takes, help with grant writing, all those types of things, because it's been done here in Central Ohio and with some pretty good success. So looking at the photo on the left, you see a situation that we've got a lot of in Franklin County, where a previously small tributary that would flow is either interrupted by agricultural use here. It was put in a tile and drained right across the field here, and then also had a lot of surface flow that was causing erosive problems. It's the same as you would see if it was tiled for stormwater. So that tributary is no longer functioning. Then on the right, what we've done is that same location, an example of what we've done to restore that. We daylighted the system. So essentially taking that old tiled system and bringing it back to the surface, building in the structures of a stream, you know, the riffles, the pools, the runs, the sinuosity, and matching that, taking that speed away from it. And then again, floodplain access, even on these small tributary streams, and a lot of tree planting. So we can take that previously manipulated and impacted stream and restore it back to what would have, what could have been there prior to its impacts. Same area, Hell Branch Run. On the left, this is the classic example of a lot of Franklin County streams, ditched and straightened. So that lower tower, again, is where I was standing in that video, kind of looking, you know, this is looking south of here, and I was kind of looking north in the beginning of that video. But again, you know, that ditch, that Hell Branch Run was ditched and straightened, and even in its larger flood events, all that water capacity was stored in that big trapezoidal shape and could not access those floodplains easier, so we're just passing that downstream. The photo of the right is post-restoration, so we've got a channel that is actually in its riffles much narrower, you know, it doesn't have that uniform shape. It has those deeper pools for habitat and things. And again, the major component of this restoration and a lot of others is that floodplain access. So now we're getting up into our floodplain benches on a river where we're maybe only getting up there in the 100-year events or bigger. So, you know, creating that floodplain access is key in these restorations. Wetland restoration, again, most communities have opportunities somewhere for wetland restoration. Our soils are fantastic for doing that practice. On the left is an area that was formerly agricultural soybeans. You can kind of see there in the foreground that they had areas where they couldn't plant because it was so wet. And, you know, 2 years after we've restored it, the photo on the right was taken recently. That's that same area. Large wetland is now in that place. And one day we were out there and there were 22 egrets using it already in its first year of establishment. So the natural resources that are here in Franklin County are willing to come back if we, you know, give them space to and give them kind of that initial kit. And then, you know, retrofit is where we can't do necessarily full-blown restoration because of some constraints. We can still do retrofit projects. We've got these on the left stream insert projects where maybe a large-scale stream restoration isn't needed or have the room or the access to do a full-scale stream restoration of some sort. We're testing out inserts that can go into these that provide that same improvement that a restoration would, with pool development, with taking erosion off of banks, with the change in depth and oxygen levels in the stream. So we're kind of retrofitting that stream in more of an urbanized environment. And then on the right, you know, we don't, maybe in your community, you have a lot of areas that are big open spaces that can be restored for wet. Well, maybe you've got some old basins that you could use. This is an example on City of Columbus where just adjacent to this was a city park. And then this was a dry basin that basically had a concrete channel through it. They could only get in and mow it a couple times a year. So it was really, you know, undesirable species that they would just knock down. It was kind of an eyesore. It was not an amenity at all to the community. And, you know, 18 grants, we were able to get in there and retrofit this basin back to a wetland treatment system. And now you've got a variety of wildlife, all kinds of different plants growing in there. You know, this forebay, it's a stormwater control. you know, it gets the impacts of that stormwater, but it's also, you know, looked upon by the residents as an amenity. And now they've got, you know, a wetland back there instead of just a wet spot. And, you know, a good opportunity for communities to do those stormwater improvements while still getting the benefits of the ecological services, and kind of getting back to some higher quality areas. And then of course, green infrastructure, they've touched on quite a bit. You know, within your setbacks and near your setbacks, green infrastructure is pretty important and through there. And again, you know, just kind of building on Dave's point of conservation and restoration as amenities for your community. On the left, downtown Columbus, prior to Lowhead Dam removal, prior to spending a good bit of grant funding downtown. And then on the right, you've got kind of the after shot. They were able to create open space, you know, in a community where they just weren't going to find it in another way. You couldn't go buy that 18 acres or whatever it was of parkland that they created. They went from, you know, having, you know, right in their downtown city of Columbus, something that a lot of people looked at as an eyesore, an area that they really had no interest in going and visit. And now on any, if you take the bike path that runs along down there, there's hundreds of people out enjoying nature and the area, and it's really an amenity to the city of Columbus. We see this in a lot of places. So we've worked with, you know, in the past, developments that have come through in the county, and there's been a unique resource, and we've worked to protect it through a conservation easement. And in the initial process, the developer, you know, for obvious reasons, is sort of reluctant or upset that they're required to do the conservation easement. You know, I could fill this area and I could get 3 more homes, or I could do this and, you know, I could run my road through here and things like that. But in hindsight, after they worked through the process and they protected the area and a restoration of the area was done and it became that amenity, the developer realized that he was able to sell those lots at a much higher price. So, you know, without the cost inputs, they were able to easily, you know, go and get that value added and get it out. So we just want to encourage people to look at the areas along their streams in those setbacks as a way that you can leverage bigger picture items and bigger protection. You know, using stormwater funds to match restoration projects. You know, some communities are using stormwater fees to purchase areas in the setbacks to avoid certain liabilities when erosion happens and things like that. So starting to think of it big picture wise and taking a look at those. And here to help. What we want to do with communities, you know, we don't always want to be running our own big, large scale stream and wetland restoration projects and you know, stabilization projects and things like that. We'd much rather be able to help impact Franklin County by working with you guys in the communities to help you develop a list of these projects, to help you look at specific ones and find funding for and help you through the process. And try to get more and more of these on the ground than we can just do on our own. So we really encourage out to us if we can get projects lined up, you know, depending on some of the impacts from COVID, you know, some of the budget cuts that we're going to have. There are going to be resources available though through H2 Ohio and the WRSP program and 319 and some of those other usual suspects. And when we come full back on board to full funding, they're going to want shovel-ready, tailor-made projects. So working with us in the short term to get those identified and how you can get into that is going to pay dividends when that funding is ready. So with that, that pretty much wraps up what I have.
Thanks, Kyle.
I'll stop screen there and turn it back to Dave, and we can answer any questions that came in or anything.
Yeah, feel free to go on the chat. I'm gonna unmute everyone. You're welcome to chime in if you like. If not, be sure you have your mute on if you don't want to be heard. So right now you should be able to unmute and chime in if you've got any questions. One thing I forgot to mention, the WOTUS rule takes effect, I believe, the 22nd. So Ohio EPA has been trying to get this draft. They should be releasing this draft here within the week, I would imagine, so that they're covered by that 22nd date. I see that general permit is kind of death by 1,000 cuts. You know, we're going to be losing that 300-foot increment on every project that chooses to impact that. They're welcome to do that. That's what the permit has. There is no, notification basically there. So if you want to do some protection, I think now's the time to have that maybe a little political will to do something about it and push that forward. Other thing I wanted to mention was the construction general permit does have provisions in it during construction for stream buffers, if you can apply them. And every project I've seen so far comes up with a reason why they can't apply it and impact those buffers. So maybe that's something we need to look at a little bit more stricter and make some comments on why can't you avoid those stream impacts as well during construction. Any comments out there? Not hearing anything. And that's fine too. I appreciate great presentation. Thank you, Mary. I hope you enjoyed that and found some use out of it. Like I say, we'll be sending out a list of the resources that we presented here for you to take a look at if you want to dive into it a little more deeper. Like Kyle mentioned, feel free to contact us on any of these items. We are here to help, and we're here to help Franklin County. We want these resources here in our community. This is something that really, like Kyle mentioned, we are at a crossroads of streams. We have a lot of resources. I've got to deal with the Darby permit, the Olentangy permit, and the general permit. And there's a reason for that. We have a lot of environmental services here in this county that we need to protect to have a real vibrant community. So once again, thank you for attending. I hope the Zoom format works out. We may be doing this for a while, so more of this is to come. I will say thanks again. And
hello? Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I what?
I can hear you. We
Happened?
can all hear
Okay.
you. I don't know who that is. I just see
Oh.
a number involved.
Okay, how do I come get you?
Maybe you perhaps, are you on the Stormwater Roundtable, or are you looking for another connection there?
I think that might be some background.
Okay. Get the Mag Reed near our house?
I hear some background.
Yeah, I think the side
with that,
conversation.
Yeah, I think we're going to just call that the end of this roundtable. And again, we'll be sending out those certificates of participation with the resources. Look forward to that in an email soon. That's all I got. Anything from you, Kyle?
Nope. Just encouraging folks to reach out to us.
Brooke, got any last?
That just while I'm thinking about it, Stormwater Roundtable, next one's in September. So, we sent that out in the Urban Review. We're looking for people that might be interested in speaking at that one. We're going to be talking about stormwater pond maintenance programs. So, love to find You know, some people, we're doing some stuff locally with some communities, but always love having some other people talk about what they're doing or how they're approaching that. So let us know if you're interested in doing that, or if you know someone that might be, please let them know. That's September 17th, I believe, but that's on Eventbrite as well. So reach out to us if you have any questions on that, though.
Great. Thank you, Brooke. With that, I'm going to adjourn it and say thank you again for attending, and we look forward to you coming next time. So long.
Thanks, everyone.
Chat.